Hello, and welcome to HHH, the podcast where we talk about those horrible humans in history. I am your host, Angela Pearson, and today we are going to be talking about someone that everybody thinks they know and is probably one of the biggest villains in history. But before we can get into that, make sure you are liking and subscribing and turning on the notifications because you want to hear when these episodes are coming out. And sharing all of this with the people that you love, that you know love true crime and just history in general. And if there is someone in history that you want to hear about, if there's someone you're dying to know more information about, please let me know. I want to talk about who you want to hear about. So make sure you leave a comment on this episode, or you can message me on Instagram or Facebook or any of those kinds of things. So let me know if there's anyone you want to hear about. And today, I do want to apologize for releasing this a little bit late. I was on a work trip and wasn't able to get this recorded in time before it was supposed to be released. So sorry about that. I apologize. But I was in New Orleans and got to see the LaLaurie house firsthand. It was crazy. It was super cool. I also saw a lot of other supposedly haunted places around New Orleans, which was pretty fun and pretty cool. I'll have to tell you about it sometime, but I apologize for the late release, but it will be worth it because today is our 50th episode. I know I've been doing this so long. We've talked about 50 people that are horrible humans, and yet we still have so many more to go. There's a never-ending supply of horrible humans throughout history. So I'm excited, but today we're doing a very special, and probably the wrongest ways possible, special individual for our 50th episode. We are going to be taking a deep dive into the life of a man whose name is synonymous with tyranny, war, and genocide. That's right, we are finally going to be talking about Adolf Hitler, and I know you guys have been waiting for it, and I know you're probably shocked that he wasn't one of the first people that we did, but, you know, like I said at the very beginning, most people think they know about Adolf Hitler. And from his humble beginnings in Austria to his meteoric rise as the leader of the Nazi Germany, especially the Nazi Party, how did a failed artist become one of history's most infamous dictators? How did he manipulate an entire nation into following his vision of hatred and destruction? And ultimately, what led to his downfall? His name still sends shivers down the spine of many people. So let's take a journey through the rise and fall of Mr. Adolf Hitler. Before we actually get into the life of Adolf Hitler, I have a few things to say. Like, first of all, I want everyone who is listening to know that when I did my master's program, if you don't know if this is the first episode you're listening to, or you just haven't heard me say this before, I actually have a master's degree in history, and it's specifically focused on European history. So out of all of my studies, there was one individual that I studied more than anyone else. I did multiple classes on the effects of what he did, and that was Hitler. So I studied Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler, and the Holocaust more than anything else. It was a very depressing few months of my life, I will tell you, but I know a lot about this topic, and there is a lot of information that I could give you, but then this episode would be like 20 hours long. So I'm going to have to cut out a lot of information, but just know that I have a really deep understanding of his life, his rise, his fall. It's something that I have studied pretty darn thoroughly. And with that being said, I feel like, especially lately, Hitler's name is thrown out a lot, especially in political disagreements. Like if there's someone you disagree with politically, or if they're doing things you don't like, or anything like that, whatever it might be, people will call their opponents Hitler or say that they're Hitler or the next Hitler, or they'll say their followers are Nazis and they're just evil Nazis. And we've seen it a lot lately, especially with other people disagreeing with what might be going on politically and acting out in ways and calling people Nazis. And I'm not going to lie, when I hear people say this or use it in an argument or even like hint at like, oh, well, they could be, might be the next Hitler, she might be the next Hitler, or they're a Nazi or whatever, they immediately, number one, lose any credibility to any of their arguments in my eyes, because it shows me that they know very little about history. And number two, I get pretty bugged because I feel like it's belittling the experience of people who actually suffered underneath this horrible man and his regime. And I know that some people will say, but Hitler did this and this person is doing this. Yeah, you can make that comparison with about anybody. You can connect any kind of dots that you want with anybody past in history. But I can assure you at this point in history, I have not seen any signs of any politician on either side acting like Hitler or trying to do things that Hitler did. And I don't like making my podcast political. And if you don't agree with me, or if what I'm saying to you offends you, if you're one of those people that genuinely thinks there's Nazis running around right now, which I will say there is a very small group of people who still believe in the Nazis' ideas. I will admit that. But majority of the people, population, politicians do not fall in this category. And if this offends you and you're one of those people who believes that, I don't really care. I really don't. I don't make money off of this podcast. I do it for fun. And I'm just letting you know that it kind of makes me angry when people use his name to try and slander people that they don't agree with or anything like that. Any of their followers or his followers saying that people nowadays are Nazis just because they disagree with things that you agree with. So please stop calling people Nazis or Hitler. It's literally the boy who called wolf kind of scenario. So let's stop. Let's all agree that after you learn more about him, maybe you'll see like, yeah, these comparisons aren't super great. And if you decide to stop listening and unfollow me, that is a loss I am definitely willing to take. So anyways, now that I've got that off my chest, I feel better. So let's actually learn the true severely boiled down history of Hitler, because like I said, there are a ton of details about his life, but we're going to cut this down as much as possible just so you can get the basic facts. Maybe one day I'll do a 21-hour-long podcast about all the nitty-gritty details, but let's do this thing. So Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889 in, again, I'm really bad at pronouncing things, Braunau, in Austria, in Alos, not in Alos. So Alois and Clara Hitler were his parents. His father, Alois, I think I'm saying that right, Alois, was a customs official, and he was known for being pretty strict and authoritarian, and especially took out a lot of anger and stuff on young Adolf Hitler. While his mother, Clara, was a very devoted homemaker, and she absolutely doted on Adolf. And especially after she had 3 of her 6 children die in infancy, she really spoiled him. And so they were very polar opposite. He had a very authoritarian father and then a very doting mother. But his childhood was pretty turbulent. His father, like I said, was pretty harsh, and Adolf really resented him for that and actually would try and push back and do the opposite of whatever his father wanted because he was so pushy. So when Hitler was 4 years old, actually, he almost drowned, but was saved by a priest by the name of Father Trammell. So when he was 4, he did almost die, so that is a thing. Hitler never really talked about that, but the Father Trammell did mention it, and some of Hitler's colleagues during the World War I, which was the Great War, did mention that he had said something, but he himself never came out and talked about that. But as a student, Hitler was intelligent but pretty unruly and often clashed with teachers and failed to meet expectations. Hitler's initially performed pretty well in school, especially in primary school, showing that he was very intelligent and ambitious. But when he transferred to secondary school, his grades declined pretty dramatically, and he clashed with his teachers and resented the structure and discipline that school kind of forced upon him. His father passed away in 1903, which actually gave him some relief because he was no longer having to deal with all of his father's demands and expectations. And with his father gone, Hitler convinced his mother to let him pursue his dream of becoming a painter, which I'm sure everyone has heard about. He wanted to become a painter. He admired German culture, architecture, the opera, and he especially liked the works of Richard Wagner, and that really started to fuel his nationalist ideas where, German excellence and German amazingness kind of started to take root. And in 1907, Hitler applied to the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, but he was rejected. Yep, that is accurate. He was rejected because he lacked talent in drawing human figures. So to make things even worse, so he's rejected from his dream school. And his mother, that same year in December, well, not in December, she passes away in December, but she was diagnosed with breast cancer and passed away in December of 1907. So the same year he got rejected from school, his mother passed away. And her death really affected Hitler because he was a pretty huge mama's boy, as you can imagine, because she kind of protected him from his father. So she had actually been the only emotional support that he had had. He didn't really do well with the ladies and had a really hard time making friends. So his mom was his main support, and when she passed away, he was devastated. He would try again to get into art school in 1908, and he tried to get into the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, but again, he was rejected a second time, and this was crushing for him. He had no backup plan for his future. He just assumed, I will be an artist, I will be making money as an artist, and I don't need to plan on anything else. Well, his future just got destroyed in front of his eyes. So after his second rejection from art school, Hitler moved to Vienna, where he pretty much lived in poverty. He took odd jobs, including painting postcards and posters, while basically staying in homeless shelters. He was homeless for a while. And it was during this time period where he became exposed to extreme nationalism, anti-Semitism, and far-right ideologies, which obviously influenced his later political beliefs. But it was while he was wandering on the streets that he was exposed to all this extremism. And by 1909, Hitler was living in a homeless shelter and later moved into a men's hostel. He made a very meager living by making those postcards. And he also sometimes worked as a laborer. But he lived pretty solitary. He didn't get a lot of close friendships and have a lot of social interactions. But while he was in Vienna, like I kind of mentioned, Vienna was a very multicultural city with a significant Jewish and Slavic population. But Hitler was influenced by pan-German nationalism and began adopting extreme anti-Semitic and xenophobic beliefs while he was wandering on the streets. And he really admired Vienna's anti-Semitic mayor, Karl Lueger, and became obsessed with the idea that Jews were responsible for Germany's decline. So he found someone to blame, I personally think, for his own life's failures. But he was claiming it was Germany's decline, but I think it was a little personal for him. So Hitler would spend hours reading newspapers, attending political lectures, and following the rhetoric of nationalist and anti-Semitic figures. This exposure really planted those seeds of his future ideologies, and despite his struggles, Hitler avoided regular employment because, get this, I've heard this recently from many, many people, that he saw himself as an intellectual, and he was above manual labor. Like, I'm just too good to have a job. I'm better than having a job, and I shouldn't have to have a job. I've heard that recently from a lot of people. Not anyone in my circles, but I have heard it. So it's interesting that Hitler genuinely thought he was above working. So Adolf's early adulthood, spanning from his late teens to his early 30s, was for sure a period of struggling, and he developed all of his ideologies and all of those deep resentments that eventually would shape his politics. And in May 1913, Hitler left Vienna and moved to Munich, Germany. And there was actually quite a few reasons for this move. First of all, he disliked Vienna's diverse population because, like I said, there was a lot of Slavs and Jews in Vienna. And he preferred the stronger German nationalists. So he wanted to live somewhere that was mostly German, which is ironic because he was not German. So he was Austrian, but hey, whatever. He really wanted to he was avoiding being drafted into the Austrian military as he despised the multi-ethnic Austro-Hungarian Empire. So he actually really hated where he came from. Ironic. But they were starting to draft people into the military, and he continued his aimless lifestyle, painting postcards and reading books on politics and philosophy and military history. But Munich was a pretty crucial turning point for Hitler. He saw it as a city that embodied the German spirit he really admired. However, like I said, he was pretty directionless until World War I broke out in 1914. That would change everything for him. So when World War I began in August 1914, Hitler enthusiastically volunteered for the German army. He was all in. And despite being an Austrian citizen, he was accepted into the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regime. And the war actually gave Hitler finally a sense of belonging and purpose that he had been lacking. And if you have ever seen pictures of him while he's fighting in World War I, his mustache, I mean, I know he's known for his iconic mustache, but the mustache he rocked during World War I is pretty epic. You should look it up. Maybe I'll try and post a picture of him on my Instagram so you can see it. But his role in the war, he served as a messenger, basically a dispatch runner on the Western Front, carrying orders between the trenches. He fought in several major battles, including the Battle of the Somme, that was in 1916, and the Battle of Arras in 1917. He was wounded in 1916 and temporarily hospitalized, and he received the Iron Cross first class, a rare honor for a corporal, which he was. Though some believe that the only reason why he got these honors was because of favoritism from, ironically, a Jewish officer. Yeah, ironic, right? Now, Hitler really idolized the German military and saw the war as a struggle for Germany's greatness. Like, this was a very personal war for him. And unlike many soldiers, he didn't form a lot of close friendships with his fellow troops. Like I said, he really struggled to create those intimate, close relationships. And he despised politics and revolutionaries who criticized the war effort. So, like I said, he took this war pretty personal. And in October of 1918, he was actually temporarily blinded in a gas attack. And unfortunately, while he was recovering in the hospital, he learned that Germany had surrendered on November 11th, 1918. This was devastating to Hitler. So like I said, he took this war pretty personally. He believed that Germany had been betrayed by the politicians and leaders of Germany because they surrendered. They were actually so close to taking France when they surrendered. And he believed that it was the political leaders of Germany, the Jews, socialists, and communists that had caused the surrender to happen. And this belief really fueled and helped to push the Nazi propaganda a little bit later. But after the war, Germany was in chaos. The Weimar Republic, which was a democratic form of government that was established after the war, and many former soldiers, including Hitler, felt betrayed by Germany's surrender. Like I said, he thought it was very personal, and a lot of men in the military took it as a personal slight on them because they had fought so hard and shown so much valor, and their government just surrendered on them. And they were like, what are you doing? Like, we could have done this. We could have finished this war. Why did you surrender? They took it really hard. And Hitler was one of those soldiers that took it very personal. Now, Germany at this time, when the war ended, was actually blamed for the entire war and stripped of basically all military strength and any kind of economic strength because all of their money had to go to paying the quote-unquote debt that Germany owed for the rest of Europe for the war. So people were starving and desperate in Germany. And like I said, they were in economic political chaos. The Weimar Republic, so the new political head, was established in 1919 and faced opposition from both communist and nationalist factions. And people had very little trust in the government after they surrendered in World War I. And what people knew, people knew this is the Great War, by the way, because there were no other wars. So if I say the Great War or World War I, it's the same thing, just so you know. So people were very upset that they had surrendered for this. And the Treaty of Versailles, 1919, was imposed. And like I mentioned, Germany was required to pay very heavy reparations. And they reduced Germany's military to basically nothing. And the whole nation of Germany was just humiliated by this. And they really resented this new form of government, and they blamed this new government for the defeat. And in 1919, Hitler remained in the army and was assigned to actually spy on political groups suspected of leftist leaning. So he actually was assigned to go listen to German Workers' Party, which they shortened it to DAP, D-A-P. He was assigned to go and spy on this, and this assignment was a pretty life-changing experience because when he went to the DAP party, he actually realized that he kind of agreed with them. It was a small nationalist, anti-Semitic group founded by Anton Drexler. And like I said, he was there to spy on them, but realized, you know what? I actually kind of agree with these people. These people have a point. And during the meeting, Hitler actually engaged in a heated argument with the speaker, and it really impressed Drexler because Hitler was so good at public speaking and orating. So Hitler didn't have any good social skills, but man, could he speak. He was really, really good at that, and Drexler saw that. So soon after he went to spy on them, he actually ended up joining the DAP, or DAP, as its 55th member, marking the beginning of his political career. So this is how he actually got into politics, by originally needing to spy on them. So this would mark the beginning of Hitler's rise to power, because he did discover that he had a pretty big influence, like ability to influence crowds, and people really loved his speeches. So he wasn't good on the one-on-one, but give him a platform and he could knock the socks off of anybody. And so he finally found what he was good at, and the war gave him purpose, and Germany's defeat gave him a cause to rally behind, which, unfortunately for the rest of the world, is not great. So Hitler would quickly gain influence due to his powerful speeches, which almost always blamed Jews, Marxists, and the Weimar government for Germany's suffering. In 1920, he helped rename the party to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP, or Nazi Party for short. He designed the swastika emblem and helped them draft the party's 25-point program, which promoted, first, German nationalism, second, rejection of the Treaty of Versailles, third, anti-Semitic policies, and fourth, expansion of German territory, which is a German word, which I'm not going to try and say. It's like Lebensraum. I don't know. I said that wrong. Anyways, this party became very popular with specifically war veterans who had felt very betrayed and disheartened at the loss of the Great War. It became very popular with unemployed workers who were struggling to provide for their families because of the economic downturn that the war caused. And it became very popular for right-wing nationalists who wanted to restore Germany's power after the embarrassing loss in the Great War. So Hitler's charisma soon made him the party's most popular speaker, drawing thousands to his rallies. And in July of 1921, he challenged Anton Drexler for the leadership of the Nazi Party and won, becoming the sole leader of the party. He established the SA, which was the oh my gosh, I should know how to say all of these. Strombetu. I can't. We're just going to call them the brown shirts. He established the brown shirts, which was a paramilitary force to intimidate opponents and create order at the Nazi rallies. So they would go about their work intimidating their enemies. Like if there was someone who was opposing them, Hitler would send out these brown shirts to kind of rough them up and get them in line and be like, no, you can't oppose us. And the brown shirts were kind of the origin of the SS. Kind of. Not really. Like, it was like a mild version of the SS. Well, we'll just get into that a little bit later. Anyways, by 1923, the Nazi Party had grown pretty darn rapidly, benefiting from Germany's hyperinflation and the economic crisis. And Hitler believed that this was the right time to overthrow the Weimar government and take power. Now, you might be wondering, how did he plan to overthrow this government? Well, I shall tell you. He was inspired by his eventual BFF, not really, Benito Mussolini. He actually kind of resented Benito. That's a whole new story for another time. But he was inspired by Benito Mussolini's march on Rome. So Hitler planned to seize control of Bavaria and to march on Berlin. So on November 8th, 1923, Hitler and the Nazis stormed a Munich beer hall where Bavarian officials were meeting, declaring a revolution, hoping that the Bavarian government and army would just automatically support him. Because he comes in and says, "Revolution! Give me your army." Because, why not? People are going to support that. Why not? Anyways, the next day, November 9th, 1923, Hitler and 2,000 of his Nazi supporters marched on Munich, but unfortunately for them, the police opened fire on them and killed 16 of his Nazi followers. His revolution failed spectacularly. It died on the spot. Hitler was immediately arrested and charged with treason. Ironically, rather than destroying Hitler's career, his treason trial made him a national figure and spread the message of the Nazi Party far and wide. So instead of, quieting it down, it actually made it worse. He used the courtroom as a platform to spread Nazi ideology, blaming the Weimar Republic, Jews, and communists for German problems. So people were listening to this. Now, this is the part where I feel like the German government kind of messed up. He was only sentenced to 5 years in prison and only served 9 months. Yeah, they only knew, right? So this is actually when Hitler would write his infamous book. He was in Landsberg prison and he wrote Mein Kampf, which translates to My Struggle, which outlined his hatred for Jews, the need for living space, quote unquote, living space by expanding eastward. He believed in Aryan racial superiority and his vision for totalitarian Nazi state. So this is when he wrote that and published it, and it didn't really take off at first, but it would eventually. Although the beer hall push had failed, Hitler had learned some pretty valuable lessons in that violence alone was not going to bring him power. So after he was released in December of 1924, he decided he was going to change tactics and decided to gain power legally through legal means by following the electoral process as well as using a ton of propaganda. So over the next decade, Hitler transformed the Nazi Party from a small extremist group into a mass movement. Now, upon release from jail, Hitler reestablished the Nazi Party, which had been temporarily banned, although I feel like they should have just fully banned that forever and ever, but hindsight's 2020. He focused on expanding and disciplining the party, making it more organized and appealing to a wider audience. He created a hierarchical structure with himself, obviously, as the absolute leader. And the SA, or the brown shirts, grew as a parliamentary wing, using intimidation tactics to, quote-unquote, convince people to vote for the party. Nothing like having a gun to your head saying you're going to vote for this person, right? Now, the SS, the Schwaffel, I can't ever say it. You guys know who the SS is. The SS was formed in 1925 as Hitler's elite personal guard under the Heinrich Himmler, who I am sure we will talk about at some other time on this podcast. So these SS members were some of his most adamant followers. And if you thought the brown shirts were bad, the SS is the worst. They're so much more violent. Now, Hitler really focused on his propaganda at this point in time, using mass rallies, radios, and speeches to spread his message. He had Joseph Goebbels, another bad dude that we will talk about later, appointed as his Nazi propaganda chair, I guess you could call him. And he played a very key role in shaping Hitler's image. Hitler really understood the power of spreading the message through propaganda even if most of it was lies, he knew the power of propaganda, so that's why he appointed Joseph Goebbels for that. Now, the Nazis really capitalized on the nationalist sentiment, blaming Jews, communists, and the Treaty of Versailles for all of Germany's suffering. However, unfortunately for the Nazi Party, the Weimar Republic had actually stabilized from 1925 to 1929 under Chancellor Gustav Stresemann, making extremists like the Nazi Party a lot less attractive to people. So, because Germany's economy and everything was starting to stabilize, these radical ideas weren't really clicking with the majority of the German people. And Hitler realized that economic collapse and public discontent were going to be the only way he could rise to power, because without those, there's no need for change, right? So, I don't know if you caught what the last date was that I said, or the last year I said, but if you know anything about history and dates, you know what's about to happen. So, Hitler got what he wanted in 1929 when Wall Street crashed, triggering the Great Depression, devastating the already suffering German economy. So he got exactly what he wanted. And employment soared from 1.3 million in 1929 to over 6 million in 1932. So Germans quickly lost faith in the Weimar Republic, making radical solutions even more appealing than they were before. So Hitler got his wish, and he took this as his chance to exploit economic despair, presenting the Nazis as Germany's only hope. So the Nazi Party vote, they skyrocketed. So in 1930, in the election, the Nazis won 18%, so only 107 seats, making them Germany's second largest party. But in July 1932, during the election, they got 37% of the seats, so 230 seats. So they became the largest party. That's how quickly they gained popularity. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why would anyone support that party? Well, first of all, desperation. Desperation left people looking for strong leadership. They needed something to fix the country, and they needed something to fix it fast. And they were very desperate. They were starving. They had no jobs. Everything was falling apart around them, and they were embarrassed. The German people were embarrassed. A lot of people had anti-Weimar sentiment. Many saw that the Weimar Republic was weak and super corrupt. A lot of people were afraid of communism. Hitler promised to crush communism, and it really appealed to the middle class and industrialists because everyone was afraid of communists. And many Germans wanted to restore their former power. They wanted their military back. They wanted to be that strong country that they once were. And many people blamed their problems on the Jews. There was a huge anti-Jewish feeling in Germany before Hitler ever took power, and he took advantage of this. So a lot of people really supported his message. And despite their popularity, the Nazis did not have majority of rule of the government. Hitler actually ran for president in 1932 against Paul von Hindenburg, but lost. But don't worry, the Nazis remained powerful in the Reichstag, which was like their parliament. So in November 1932, the Nazis' votes dropped a little bit. They only got 196 seats due to political unrest, and the people were kind of not liking the brown shirts and the violence that they would incite to support the Nazis. So they weren't a big fan of that. So that's why their votes dropped. But in January of 1930, under pressure from conservative elites, President Hindenburg appointed Hitler as chancellor. Now, Hindenburg and his advisors believed that they could actually control Hitler and use him more as a puppet to maintain stability. Oh, those silly, silly men. They only knew who they were dealing with. But Hitler quickly outmaneuvered them and consolidated his power within weeks. Not months, not years, weeks. It only took him weeks to do this. On February 27th, 1933, the German parliament building was set on fire. The Reichstag was set on fire. And the Nazis blamed communists for this fire, using it as an excuse to arrest all of their political opponents. But I will tell you this secret. It was actually the Nazis that started the fire. So they had a reason to blame the communists. Yeah. There's a fun fact for you. Anyways, Hitler convinced Hindenburg to sign the Reichstag fire decree, suspending civil liberties and allowing mass arrests of communists. Can you imagine, just one little fire? That's all it took for Hitler to get this much power and literally have all of his political opponents arrested. Hitler proposed the Indelible Act, which gave him the power to rule by decree, bypassing the Reichstag, so just ignoring the parliament. And the act actually passed with the help of intimidation from the brown shirts, making Hitler the legal dictator. So it only took him a few weeks to take power for himself. And he immediately banned all opposing parties, making the end of democracy in Germany and the Nazi Party the only option for people. So people no longer had an option. It was Nazis or nothing else. So now remember Hitler's loyal followers, the brown shirts? Yeah, they were the people who would intimidate, attack people. We've talked about them just a little bit. Well, Hitler started to see his SA, the brown shirts, as a threat to his power. Because, that's what dictators do. They increase people's power and then get paranoid. So he decided he had to do something about that. And on June 30th, 1934, he ordered his new, more ruthless military group, the SS, to purge SA leaders, including Ernst Röhm, who had been a loyal follower of Hitler's from the very beginning. This action was called the Night of Long Knives. Up to 1,000 people were killed on this night of terror as the SS hunted down members of the SA, or the brown shirts. And this completely solidified Hitler's control over the Nazi Party and the military. And to make matters worse, President Hindenburg died on August 2nd, 1934, and with his death, Hitler merged the office of Chancellor and President, declaring himself Führer, or leader, of Germany, and the German army swore an oath of loyalty to Hitler, giving him absolute power. So it didn't take him very long. So by 1934, Hitler had completely dismantled democracy, turning Germany into a Nazi dictatorship. His manipulation of the economic crisis, propaganda, and political violence allowed him to take control legally. So once in power, Hitler eliminated all opposing parties and established a police state. Now, if you're thinking that any politicians nowadays are Nazis or dictators, and they haven't eliminated, and by eliminated, I literally mean killed or imprisoned, all of their political opponents within the first month or two of taking power, they are not a dictator. And I say this after studying quite a few of them and covering quite a few of them on this podcast. Dictators don't mess around. They get rid of opposition as fast as humanly possible. So Hitler established 2 enforcing bodies of the government. Another sign you aren't dealing with a dictator if they don't make these within the first month or two of being in power. He created the SS and the Gestapo. So the SS was already around, but the SS was placed under Heinrich Himmler, again, another horrible human. And they became the elite Nazi force controlling and policing and controlling the concentration camps. And then there was the Gestapo, which was the secret police, who arrested and tortured anyone who was suspected of opposing Hitler's regime. So he ramped up his propaganda machine and he took censorship to a whole new level. Books that he deemed un-German were burned in mass rallies, and opposing political parties, labor unions, non-Nazi organizations were banned. And no, banning books in elementary, middle school, or even high schools is not the same thing as the banning of the books that Hitler did. We can't go into all the details of what happened, but I guarantee you they are not the same thing. Not the same at all. So Hitler's next move was to increase the power of Germany. He wanted Germany to recover from the Great Depression and get ready for war. So first, he increased public works and jobs, like he was building the Autobahn to help get more people employed. He wanted to increase the economy, and that meant he had to increase military spending pretty quickly. He immediately violated the Treaty of Versailles. So Germany under the Treaty of Versailles was not supposed to have any kind of military strength or anything. They were supposed to stay out of the demilitarized zone of the Rhineland, but Hitler just ignored that. He immediately put troops into the Rhineland in 1936. What did Britain and France do about this? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And this showed Hitler, I can do whatever I want. So, in 1938, Hitler pressured Austria into allowing a Nazi takeover. So German troops entered Austria unopposed, making it part of Germany. Again, nothing from France or England. Now, Hitler demanded that Germany should have the Sudetenland, which was a German-speaking region of Czechoslovakia in 1938. Again, Britain and France, following appeasement, trying to avoid any kind of war, just allowed Hitler to take it through the Munich Agreement. Now, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain believed that if they did this, quote, peace in our time would come. Yeah, surrendering to bullies doesn't ensure peace, but more bullying. So, yeah, this was not smart, because in March of 1939, Hitler would shockingly break his promise and invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. It was at this moment that Britain and France finally realized that Hitler was not going to stop. A little late for that, but here we are. And then in 1939, the Nazi-Soviet Pact was formed between Hitler and Joseph Stalin, signing a non-aggression pact. They even secretly agreed to divide Poland once Germany had invaded. So, like I mentioned from the start of this, Hitler really targeted Jews and blaming them for Germany's problems. So, in 1935, he enacted the Nuremberg Laws, where Jews lost all citizenship and all basic rights. So, it didn't take him very long to do this, by the way. And all marriages between Jews and non-Jews were forbidden. And then on November 19th through the 20th of 1938, there was the Night of Broken Glass. This was where things took a turn for the Jews. It was a nationwide, state-organized wave of violent attacks on Jewish homes, businesses, and synagogues. Over 7,500 Jewish businesses were looted and destroyed. 267 synagogues were burned, and firefighters were ordered not to help or intervene unless it was a non-Jewish building. So, Jewish homes and schools and hospitals were vandalized. Over 100 Jews were murdered on that night, and thousands were beaten in the streets. And these laws and attacks were just the beginning of what would eventually become the Holocaust. And it took less than 4 years for the full-blown Holocaust to take place. So there were mass arrests of Jewish people. There were 30,000 Jewish men that were arrested and sent to a few different concentration camps, which had already existed for all of those political opponents of the Nazis. They had built the concentration camps originally for their political opponents, but then they started sending Jews there, mostly Jewish men at first. And the conditions were brutal there. They were tortured, they were starved, they were beaten to death, they were worked to death, and families had to pay ransoms to try and get their Jewish relatives out of these concentration camps, which we know eventually that wouldn't matter, right? So instead of punishing the attackers, the Nazis actually fined Jews 1 billion Reichsmarks, about $400 million US at the time, for the damages. So it was the Jews' fault that the Jews were attacked, basically. And they were forced to repair their own businesses, but could not collect on any insurance payouts. And November 12th, 1938, new laws banned Jews from running businesses or attending schools. So you can see that this happened all really, really quickly. And it shaped Germany very rapidly to turn into this anti-Jewish country. So many Jews realized that they were no longer safe in Germany and really tried to flee the country. But most countries, including the United States and Britain, had really strict immigration quotas and refused to accept immigrants, which is very unfortunate because we know what's coming, right? So the Night of Broken Glass, or the Kristallnacht is what it's called in German, set the stage for mass deportation and extermination. And within a year, Germany invaded Poland, so in September of 1939, that would start World War II. And by 1941, so just 2 years later, Hitler launched the, quote, final solution, which was the systematic murder of over 6 million Jews. Now, Nazi Germany's concentration camps were key instruments of repression, forced labor, and genocide, operating from 1933 to 1945. And it was initially designed, like I said, for the political opponents, but eventually they turned into extermination centers, killing millions and millions of Jews, political prisoners, Romani people, disabled individuals, LGBTQ individuals, and others. So they were horrendous. And I would love to go into more details about this, but it's such a deep, complex thing that we're not going to be able to get into the depth of the concentration camps. Maybe one day we'll just talk about those. But we got to go on to World War II. We're running out of time. I know this is going to be a long episode. Sorry, guys. This is just a really deep, complex topic. So I'm trying to give you the basics. But anyways, we're on to World War II, which again is another deep topic. So we won't be able to cover all the nitty-gritties. So on September 1st, 1939, Hitler's forces invaded Poland using a new military tactic called Blitzkrieg, aka Lightning War. And this is where tanks, aircraft, and infantry really moved quickly and efficiently to overwhelm Polish forces. Like, they didn't even have a chance. And Britain and France had warned Hitler that he shouldn't do this. And because he did it, they declared war on Germany on September 3rd of 1939. So, after he invaded, it went pretty quickly. So because of Blitzkrieg, Polish forces fell within weeks. And then they had the pact with the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union was attacking from the east. And then once Poland fell, Britain and France declared war on Germany. France fell in May of June 1940. So not long after because Hitler launched a surprise attack through Belgium to the Ardennes forest, and German forces captured Paris in just 6 weeks. It took them 6 weeks to get to Paris, and France surrendered on June 22nd, 1940. So just a month after they invaded. And Britain now stood alone against Germany. So they were the only force opposing Germany at this point. And Hitler decided he wanted to invade Germany. So first, he sent over the Luftwaffe, which was the German Air Force, and bombed the crap out of British cities in what was called a blitzkrieg, hoping to force Britain to surrender. While the Royal Air Force, or RAF, used radar and superior tactics to defeat the Luftwaffe. So Hitler abandoned his idea of invading Britain, which was called Operation Sea Lion, which I don't know why I find so entertaining. Anyways, Hitler decided to change tactics. He was going to invade the Soviet Union, which he did on June 22nd, 1941. Now, in my opinion, this was the dumbest thing that Hitler ever did. I mean, he did a lot of dumb things, but this lost him the war because it turned his one-front war into a two-front war, and he forgot something super important that Napoleon Bonaparte also forgot, and it's why Napoleon Bonaparte's invasion of Russia failed and why Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union failed. It's called winter. Yeah. Russia had that on their side. Winter. So they at first did really well. The Germans at first did really well and took Stalingrad. But eventually their troops pushed too far into Russia and winter came. They didn't have the supplies. They eventually had to surrender. And there was over 90,000 German troops that surrendered in February of 1943, which was a huge loss for Hitler. And then he was also losing in the North African campaigns, which was not great for him. And soon, obviously, the United States would join the war, and the Allies started counterattacking. So they had D-Day in Normandy on June 6, 1944. And then they had the Battle of the Bulge, which was Hitler's last major counterattack. And after this, Germany, they lost. And after this, Germany had no chance of winning the war at all. The Allies, which now included the Soviet Union because Hitler had turned his back on the Soviet Union. So he was fighting, like I said, a two-front war. He was kind of screwed. So the tide had turned after devastating defeats in North Africa, Stalingrad, and Normandy. The Allies closed in on Hitler's regime, and the Red Army was pushing in westward while the Western Allies advanced from France. Hitler increasingly became paranoid and detached from reality and retreated to his bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery in Berlin. Now, the bunker was a concrete underground fortress, but no one had any faith they were going to win. So Hitler rarely left his rooms. His hands were trembling, which a lot of people think at this point he was really addicted to opioids because he had a physician that would inject him with something like every day to keep his energy up. And they're pretty sure it was opioids, so they think he was pretty addicted to drugs at this point. And he would lash out to his officers. He was super paranoid. Like all the other dictators we've ever talked about, the paranoia sets in. He dismissed all of his generals because he accused them of betrayal and believed that Germany had failed him. Not he had failed Germany. No. No, obviously not. Germany had failed him. So on April 29th, 1945, Hitler actually married Eva Braun in the bunker. So she had been kind of his companion for a while, and they ended up marrying on the 29th. The next day, he had dictated his final will and obviously blamed the Jews for the war because it couldn't have been him that caused it since, he had imprisoned and killed most of the Jews, but whatever. And at 3:30 p.m. on April 30th, Hitler and Eva Braun actually committed suicide. He shot himself in the head, and Eva actually took cyanide. Loyal SS officers ended up burning their bodies in the garden above the bunker, which, if you ask me, is kind of strange. My guess is because they saw what had happened to the bodies of his BFF Mussolini, but there's another theory, which I will tell you about in a second. On May 1st, 1945, German radio announced Hitler was dead, and on May 2nd, 1945, the Soviets actually captured the Rhine Chancellery. So the Soviets made it there before the United States. It was kind of a rush to see who could get there first, but the Soviets reached it first. So obviously, the Nazi Party crumbled, and Germany surrendered on May 7th, 1945, ending the war in Europe. Now, fun fact, there are at least 24 different assassination attempts on Hitler's life from 1932 to 1944. Obviously, none of them worked, but they ranged from poisoning from food or letters, or bombs, or just trying to shoot him. So there was a wide range of attempts on his life. And some of the food poisoning ones didn't actually work because Hitler lived a mostly vegan life and didn't eat some of the foods that had been poisoned because they weren't vegan. So there's a fun fact on that. And now the other theory about why his body was burned is some people believe that it wasn't actually Hitler and they think it was a body double. And that's why they burned it so you couldn't recognize it. And some people actually think he escaped down to Argentina, which housed a lot of Nazis. After the fall of Germany, they would flee to Argentina to escape the consequences of their actions. So some people actually believe that he survived and fled down there. So after Hitler's death and after the surrender of Germany, the Nuremberg trials went on, which was held to hold Nazi leaders accountable for all of their crimes. And like I said, Hitler's suicide marked the end of Nazi Germany. And then the Nuremberg trials ensured that justice was served. Mostly, they were still hunting down Nazis for a while after that to try and punish them for what they did. And the world vowed never again. But history warns us to remain vigilant against tyranny. Unfortunately, I looked it up. There have been well over 100 genocides since the fall of the Nazi Party. And people don't like to talk about that. But yeah, it was closer to like 150 genocides since then. And some pretty recently. But people don't talk about those because they only want to focus on what Hitler did. And now I can't even begin to tell you the effects that Hitler and his Nazi Germany had on the world because there is not enough time for that because it's a lot. It is a lot. But just know that Hitler and his life, that one individual has impacted millions and millions of people for the worse. And that is why Hitler is our horrible human in history for this week. And I know I didn't go into tons of detail because there's just so much. There's so much about what he did and the details of his life. But I hope that gives you a good basic overview of what he did, what his life looked like, and how he actually rose to power. So thank you so much for tuning in. I know this is a little bit long, but thanks. Don't forget to subscribe and share people that you think will like this. And be sure you tune in next week when we talk about the infamous Edward Teach. Don't know that name? Well, maybe you'll recognize his other name because you remember everybody has to change their names. His other name is Blackbeard. So tune in next week so you can learn more about Blackbeard and all the crazy things he did. So we will see you guys next week. Bye.